Today. I'm Faith and I work as a trainee lived experience researcher at a charity called McPin Foundation. We're a specialist mental health charity and one of the partners in the Centre for Society and Mental Health. And today I'll be talking to you all about systems change. And I'll do that by reflecting on my experiences of working on the Black Thrive Employment Project and how it aims to achieve systems change through Black and community-led grant making. So, a little bit about me and my journey, how I got into research. So my academic background is actually in biomedical science. If you ask me why I chose that route, my only answer would be pressure. I never really liked the topic, but apparently I had to choose my career at 18. So I went ahead and chose biomed. And that wasn't a good choice. I don't recommend going to university without a clear idea of what you're doing. I've added a picture of Amsterdam there because that's where I was just 1 week before my final exams. At the time, I just really didn't care. So before I went to uni, I had already been suffering with depression for many years, unbeknownst to me. I knew something was wrong, but I had no idea what depression really was, and that was a thing that could apply to me. So when I got to uni, it became unmanageable, and I sought help from my GP. And this was the first time I felt comfortable going to my GP with anything mental health related, because back home in London, my GP was Nigerian. I'm also Nigerian, and he'd worked with my mum, who was a nurse. And mental health is just such a taboo topic in my culture. So there was no way I was going to expose myself like that. So when I got to uni, I felt anonymous. I sought help from my new white GP. I scored 37 out of 40 on the questionnaire that they used to diagnose depression. I was prescribed medication and given a leaflet to self-refer myself to cognitive behavioral therapy. And when I went to therapy, I hated it. One, because she gave me homework to do. One of the main things that I told the therapist was that I was already struggling to keep up with work from uni. So I wasn't going to be doing extra homework. And then another thing was that it just felt so emotionally laborious, speaking to a white woman about some of my experiences as a Black person in the UK. It was uncomfortable, and my assumption was that she wouldn't understand, so I never went back. So all of these experiences that I had of mental health and barriers to services for people like me made me realize how much I was intrigued by mental health. I decided that that's what I wanted to do with my career. So I started from the bottom. I'd already volunteered in a lot of homeless shelters and care homes. I'd volunteered with people with disabilities before just because I enjoyed it. So I went into support work. I didn't really have a choice, to be honest, as they were the only job that responded to me at the time. But I loved it there. I gained a lot of experience, especially in my communication and interpersonal skills. And a year later, I moved on to the NHS. I worked in a mental health forensic psychiatric hospital or secure unit. And the second picture is actually me in the hospital around my birthday, almost exactly a year ago. I've got my security alarm around my waist, my lanyard that snaps in 5 places just in case someone tries to use it to choke me. I've got my NHS pen made from cardboard, so if anybody tries to use it as a weapon, it will just fold in half. So you can kind of get a sense of the setting that I was working in. And again, I really did love working there. I really felt like it was my duty to just help the patients there feel human. Simple things like talking to them and actually listening to them made such a visible impact in their lives. But outside of that, there wasn't much I could really do to help them, and that was quite hard, especially because of the forensic setting. The rules and the safeguarding were extremely rigid, and safety was prioritized over the well-being of the patients. So in that job, I started to see a lot of difference in the experiences held by the Black and some other ethnic minority patients compared to the white patients. There were differences in how they got into the system, differences in how they were treated in the hospital, and differences in what happened to them when they left the hospital. So eventually it got to the point where I felt like I needed to progress with my career. And I wasn't going to be able to do that the way I wanted within that hospital. So I decided I was leaving, but when I did, that I would dedicate the next chapter in my career to figuring out these differences in experiences of people of different backgrounds and cultures and how it affects their mental health and access to mental health services. So by some miracle, I found an advert for a role at the McPin Foundation, who are a mental health charity. And they were looking for someone to work specifically on the Black Thrive Employment Project, which is a project designed to create systems change for Black people. So I've been working at the McPin Foundation for almost a year now. I'm a trainee lived experience researcher. And the goal of McPin is to improve mental health and well-being in communities everywhere through applying knowledge generated by high-quality lived experience research. What is lived experience research? In mental health research, it's generally used to describe an approach that's informed and enriched through researchers drawing on personal experience of mental illness, either their own or as a carer. And this can be through things like building relationships with research participants, framing interview questions, interpreting data, for example. And McPin champion lived experience expertise in all aspects of mental health research. And the Black Thrive project is underpinned by similar concepts, focusing on the lived experience expertise of the community. In the context of the Black Thrive work, the definition of lived experience is a bit broader than what we might generally use for mental health research. So the project focuses on the employment system, and it includes lived experience as someone who may have experienced a long-term physical or mental health condition, experience of the employment system, unemployment, and the lived experience of systemic racism and discrimination. So using lived experience in research is a form of systems change. And therefore, most of the work that I do revolves around systems change. Sometimes the systems change just applies to my role. It might be that the project itself is based on systems change, or it could be a mixture. So I have my own experiences with discrimination, with employment, with mental health, which I'm sure many of us do, whether directly or indirectly. And I use my experiences in the research and the work that I do. So there are many different ways to use lived experience in research. For me, it means sometimes I'm a peer researcher, which is the same as any other researcher, except that I'll have the direct lived experience of the research topic, and that will shape my research and analysis of the data. Other times it means that I might use my experiences to support other people in spaces where they're using their lived experience. For example, mentoring other peer researchers, or supporting participants in lived experience advisory panels, or LEAPs. And other times it means that I'm providing guidance to external organizations about the best way to co-produce their work with other lived experience experts. And that might be their service users, it might be carers, members of the community that they want to undertake research with. Today, a key phrase that I'll keep referring to is systems change. Nathan, if you could share the Menti slide. Thank you. So if you go to menti.com and put in the code on the screen, the link's also in the chat, and we're going to make a word cloud. So before I influence you with all my ideas of systems change, I want to hear about your views. So if you just put in a couple of keywords that come to mind when you hear the word systems change. So we've already got some reform, giving back power. So quite good ones. The fall of communism. The fall of communism, that's interesting. Revolution, bottom up, equity, required, I agree. And justice as well. I'm seeing difficult and complex, and those are two words that are going to come up in my presentation later on as well. Giving back power and redistributing power, bringing back dignity and breaking walls down. Someone put despair. That's an interesting one as well, despair. Shift of narratives, which goes with the theme for today. Policy reform, an important one. So thank you, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen again and continue with the presentation. But those I'll be able to share with you the word cloud after the presentation as well. Just give me 1 second. Let me take back the screen. Okay. So Thank you for all your contributions to the word cloud. I'll be looking at that later. But systems change is a big part of the work that I do. So what is systems change and what are systems? So through my work, I've come to realize that generally people understand systems as healthcare, education, benefits and welfare, law, employment. And this is expected as these are some of the major social structures that we have in the UK. But there are also other systems such as religious systems, art systems, science systems, probably anything that you can think of has some sort of structure or system. And what I've also come to realize is that everyone has their own unique perspective of what systems change means to them. So perspectives on systems change depend on different things, such as what systems you interact with, where you sit in those systems. For example, there might be two people interacting with the same system with different views. If we think of someone who is a director of the job centre and someone who's receiving universal credit, they're going to have two completely different views of the UK's welfare system. How you entered the system is another influencer. Was it by choice? Was it involuntary? Years ago, I remember reading an article from The Guardian, and it said that 1/5 of homeless people had committed a crime in order to get off the streets just to have some form of food and shelter. And it's a really sad fact, but their perspective of the prison system might be more positive than someone who was arrested for a crime that they didn't want to get caught for. And lastly, your experiences within those systems will shape your perspective. And all of this is a part of your lived experience of interacting with systems and will form your views on what systems need to be changed, the changes that are needed and how to go about it. So today, the definition of systems change that I'll be going by is an intentional, radical journey to permanently cause change within a problematic social system. So it may disrupt preconceived values, attitudes, relationships, behaviors, power structures, policies, processes, and resources. So this definition is actually taken from a report that myself and my colleagues have recently put together on the Black Thrive Employment Project with one of our partners, the Social Innovation Partnership. So the Black Thrive Employment Project is a project run by the organization Black Thrive, and it's being funded by Guys and St. Thomas's charity, and it's founded on the idea of systems change. So the goal is to ensure that Black people in Lambeth with long-term physical and mental health conditions are no less likely to be in employment than white people under the same circumstances. So to go about this, one aspect of the project is giving out £300,000 in grants to individuals and organizations that are running projects to improve employment outcomes for Black people with long-term mental or physical conditions in Lambeth. This includes upskilling, supporting people with recruitment processes, mentoring people, confidence building workshops, for example. And the grant money was distributed by a community working group, which aims to bring lived experience, community expertise, and systems knowledge together. So in this project, people in the community are given the decision-making power to choose who the money goes to. So the project is ensuring that individuals who have experienced the employment system and have lived experience of being Black and having long-term conditions are at the forefront. And I'm also a member of this, of the working group. So we've already done a first round where we gave out £120,000 to 8 different projects, and applications are currently open for the remaining £180,000 to be given out to some amazing and innovative new projects. Some of the current projects that we've already funded include a coaching and development program for Black parents with long-term conditions, a sewing workshop that teaches people how to make things and sell them online, a project that supports Black people with dyslexia and aims to reduce stigma in the community. So those are just some of the examples of some of the things that have been funded. And the working group prioritized giving grants to individuals who are Black or disabled, or organizations that are Black or disabled led. And the systems change ambition here is focused on the employment system. But systems don't operate in isolation, so we're also interested in projects linked to education and healthcare. So not only does this project aim to improve employment outcomes for Black people, it also gives an opportunity to projects that might not have might not have been successful in more traditional funding processes, which is another form of systems change. So why is this project so important? Nathan, if you could share the details of the quiz.
So just a heads up on how the quiz works. You'll all be asked to enter your names on Mentimeter. The code's still the same. You'll see you've been asked to enter your names there. Your emoticons and things you see on the screen are all randomly selected, so no reflection on you as individuals. And once we've got everyone's on there, we will get started.
Thank you, Nathan. And then a bit of background about why the project was set up is because there are huge racial disparities in employment across the UK, but also specifically in Lambeth, which is the area that we're prioritising in the project. And like I mentioned, the whole goal is to make sure that Black people have better access to quality employment support and better experiences of employment.
Another few seconds. Just for reference with the Mentimeter, the details are in the chat, and you'll see on the top of the screen the prompts there to go to menti.com and then type in the code at the top if you haven't joined the Menti previously before. Okay. I think we can get started. Faith.
Okay. Oh wait, Nathan, is it the answer's going to pop up? Okay.
Bear with me. So the answers will pop up at the end of the timer, yeah. Let me restart that one.
And while you're doing the quiz, you might realize how there's no statistics on Black and disabled people, because unfortunately the research that's out there just doesn't stretch that far. And there's barely any research on Black people, let alone Black and disabled people. So most people got the correct answer. Black people are less likely to be in employment than other groups. We can do the next question.
So go on to the leaderboard next, which will show you who answered this the quickest.
E.T.
Some work.
Those are some interesting names. We've got E.T. so far.
So, okay, next question then.
Let's see. Majority of people got this question right as well. Black people are more likely to be in low paid and dangerous work. Let's see who answered that the quickest.
Go on to the next question next, and then we'll see the leaderboard just after.
Okay.
Question number 3.
I think this might be one of the most tricky ones. We'll see. I'm surprised most people got that one right, actually. In Lambeth, 53% of disabled residents are unemployed compared to 15% of non-disabled residents.
So now we'll check out the leaderboard.
Let's see. Oh, E.T.'s gone. We've now got Priya Raju in first place, I'm trying to think of a prize, actually, something I can give over Zoom. I will be thinking.
We'll go on to the next one. Question number 4.
So everybody got this question right. In Lambeth, Black adults are the predominant users of basic skills training programs. However, they are the most dissatisfied with services. See the next question. So a survey that found that 50% of young Black men gave the job centre a rating of what out of 5? And this one was it was one of the key statistics in a literature review that we wrote. So yeah, 50% of young Black men gave the job centre a rating of 1 out of 5, which is terrible, but also not surprising, to be honest. Can do the next question.
Quick stop off on our favourite leaderboard.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, are you still at the top?
Oh, Stingalicious taken over. Stingalicious and fastest as well.
No pressure coming into the last 2 questions.
How many questions have we got left? I think we've got 2 questions left.
2 left, so we're 6 now.
So Black Caribbean children are how likely to be permanently excluded from school? And this is in comparison to white students. And it's from a research study from 2015. And this one actually surprised me because I was surprised to see it written down on paper, you know, blatantly. So the answer was Black Caribbean children are 3 times more likely to be permanently excluded from school than white pupils. And then the last question.
Got the leader to really heat it up for the last question. Big changes at the top.
Ooh, that was a big overtake. Danielle's overtaken by a lot. I recognize some of the names on here.
The final question, and the pressure is on.
I'm still thinking about that prize. I'll come back to that.
Okay, final question. Good luck, everybody.
So this one's about education and employment combined. Young Black graduates were how likely to be unemployed a year after graduation compared to young white graduates? Let's see. Oh, some of you got it right. But yeah, young Black graduates were twice as likely to be unemployed a year after graduation compared to young white graduates. So let's see who won in the end. Naomi. Well done, Naomi. I'm still thinking about the prize. If you want to tell me what you want your prize to be, put in the chat. But I'll keep it in the meantime. But thank you. Thanks, Nathan. Let me share. 1 second. Okay. So these are just the answers to the quiz. Well done. I think most people got most of them right. But yeah, you can see you can kind of get an idea of why we want to and need to increase the employment support available to Black people with health conditions, especially. Back to the project. So as I mentioned before, Black Thrive have given the community members within the working group the power to decide how the grants will be allocated. So that you can understand its structure a bit better, this diagram shows the membership of the working group at the start of the project. So there's three members of Black Thrive, one senior researcher from McPin, 2 members of the community who co-chaired the meetings, 3 community researchers from our partner, the Social Innovation Partnership, and they actually went into the community in Lambeth and spoke to Black people with health conditions about their experiences of employment to feed back to the working group. We had 3 community members rooted in Lambeth, and they had lived experience or professional experience of the employment system. 4 community researchers from McPin, who not only have relevant lived experience, but also have connections in Lambeth. And they were also part of conducting the research in communities that was fed back to the working group. 1 peer researcher from McPin, which is me, and I'm not referred to as the community peer researcher, as I do not reside in Lambeth. And myself and the peer researchers at McPin all have dual roles. So we're not only members of the working group, but we're also evaluating the project through developmental evaluation. And I'll speak more about that in a minute. So this kind of community involvement is another form of systems change. Everyone in the working group has some sort of lived experience relevant to the project. So it might be a Black person residing in Lambeth. They might have a long-term health condition, which can include experiences with mental health, whether personally or through family. They've also all had to interact with the employment system themselves, and they can use their experiences to shape the projects. So in short, they know best where the money needs to go. And the working group understands the target demographic. They ensure that the community benefits from this project. They help to make sure the disseminated research is more accessible. They also provide unique perspectives of systems and systems change. So we spoke a bit before about what influences your idea of systems change, and each working group member has their own experiences. So I'm going to play a recording of one of the community researchers from the Social Innovation Partnership, who's a member of the working group, and their view on how the focus on race rather than culture might not allow for effective systems change. I'm actually going to reshare my screen quickly because I don't think I have shared sound. Let me do that. Okay, so.
I think there's definitely something to be said about how we, and again, I make reference to the use of the word Black, because I think when you use the word Black, it's almost dismissive. And that in saying Black, you then do just put everything in one category. But I think if we shift the understanding to move from race and shift it to culture, and building services that take into consideration people's culture, what impact do we think that may have?
So that's from a podcast that we were recording from a weekly meeting that we used to have to reflect on the project. And I'm going to play another recording from one of our community researchers, also from the Social Innovation Partnership, and their views on asking larger white-led organizations to help us out rather than starting from scratch and building foundations in the community. So this is what they said.
It's all about self-governance, doing it from within the community, build up our own wealth. I think that's where we're going to make a big difference. Once we start building our own businesses, create our own banks, create our own funding, I guess that's when real change comes. Why are we looking at them for them to make a change when it's not in their interest? It's not in their interest.
So we used to have a lot of these reflective kind of conversations around the project every week. So those are some of the opinions of the community researchers. So the way we went about allocating the grant money in the working group was this. So over several months, the working group discussed the priorities that we wanted to focus on to improve employment outcomes for Black people and what kind of projects would ideally be funded. The applications opened in September of last year, and Black Thrive received 84 applications. This was then narrowed down to a shortlist of 11 applications based on who actually met the criteria that the working group had set out and agreed to. Applications closed a month later in October, and the working group discussed each applicant and gave them a score. So in the end, 8 projects were successful. There was a good mix of established organizations and others who were just starting out or working to conduct their project on their own. And the majority of the projects were also Black and disabled led. So how will we know the project is successful? So there are 3 methods of evaluation that we're using on this project. So evaluation and data collection is built into the grants funding process. Funded projects will supply data on their outcomes and challenges, for example, demographics data and outcome measures such as how their beneficiaries' well-being has changed since being involved in the project, whether their employment status has changed. Then we have the summative evaluation. And the summative evaluation allows the project to explore the success of its work overall. And this includes outcomes for Black people in Lambeth and any systems change that occurs. And the summative evaluation will be done by an external evaluation partner at the end of the project. And then we have the developmental evaluation led by McPin. This project is using this approach to do real-time evaluation in 4 cycles on the processes and the systems of the project itself. And this will allow the project to proactively address any challenges as they arise, as well as place additional resource into things that are proving successful. So first things first, McPin is a white-led organization, and this was a big elephant in the room at the beginning of the project. The organization was aware that it needed to bring in more expertise from Black people, and not only to ensure that the evaluation was carried out from a lived experience perspective, but also to be an active participant in the systems change that the Black Thrive project was based on. So I recently found out that a key discussion that took place at McPin before I was recruited was whether it would be better to hire a Black project manager or hire Black people at trainee level who had the skills and potential to grow into the role. So McPin chose the latter because hiring a project manager meant that they were taking another Black person out of the system to work with them, whereas upskilling trainees like myself meant that they were adding to the pool of skilled Black researchers in the system. So this is our developmental evaluation team at McPin. Davino, Ashil, and I are trainee peer researchers. Then we have Rajvi, who's a senior peer researcher, and Tanya, the project manager. So part of the systems change here is that Tanya and Rajvi are progressively doing less in the project, while equipping myself, Davino, and Ashil with the skills necessary to take a lead on the developmental evaluation. So now you know that not only am I a member of the working group for the Black Thrive Employment Project, but I'm also an evaluator for the developmental evaluation. The McPin Foundation are leading on this, and what a developmental evaluation does is it shifts the role of evaluators from being a judge at the end, more so to being a critical friend alongside the journey. So we're doing 4 cycles where we collect data from across the project and the working group and feed all of the data back to them. And the goal of this is to make sure that the working group is functioning as best as it can, so that everybody's voices are being reflected in the decisions that are being made in the group, and that people feel like the right decisions are being made. So the data we collected included surveys, interviews, reflections, the guide for the interview, the survey questions, and the template for reflections were all co-produced with community researchers. And all of the data was transcribed by an external transcription company and anonymized. Then our evaluation team analyzed the data using thematic analysis. And each piece of the data was coded multiple times by different members of our team who were both internal and external to the working group. Then we wrote up the report and facilitated meetings where we fed back everybody's opinions and provided some options for change. So the developmental evaluation method changes over time, and it reflects what the project needs. For example, in the first cycle, And we found that people found it hard to find the time to write up the individual reflections. So in the second cycle, we created and scheduled group reflection spaces, and they had a much better attendance. We also found that the data was very focused on the working group and its processes. So in the second cycle, we adjusted the interview guides to more to explore the broader systems change work being done by the Black Thrive team. So if Nathan, if you share the word cloud, we're just gonna, put in some words and phrases about what you think the positives of community involvement are. And then afterwards, I'll share what people in the project found positive about working in the project. And the link again is in the chat, or you can put the code in on menti.com. Growing inclusion and belonging.
Communication.
Accurate representation. Meaningful engagement.
Jesus, communication.
Innovation is a really key one, I think, as well. And ownership, I actually really like that one.
Understanding the crowd you're talking to, age-wise.
Diversity, knowledge exchange. That was actually one of the key things that came up in our developmental evaluation. It's a transfer of knowledge. Power to the people, for sure. Co-creation, and co-production. Mutual benefit is something that is really important, and something that I think community involvement definitely ensures, is that people that are being observed, researched on, or whatever, are actually benefiting from the research in the end. Fair treatment. Disrupts power. Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen again, and again, we'll share the word cloud at the end of the conference as well, because these are some really interesting keywords and phrases that are being used. Share my screen. So these were some of the positive things that were said by working group members. So someone said, I love how this project is challenging the status quo in many ways. Someone said, I'm enjoying the variety of discussion and how pertinent it all is. I'm enjoying learning how creating criteria and distributing funding works. I feel like I'm making a change to a community that I belong to. It's a welcoming and mutually respectful place. The project has a clear purpose. I get a feeling of fulfillment that comes with knowing that I'm working towards a cause that contributes to the improvement of Black lives. And all of these quotes were collected from the surveys that we conducted as part of the developmental evaluation. So not only did we collect survey data from the working group, we also collected interview and reflection data from people across the project, including the working group and partners at different levels of the project, and we analysed it all at McPin. So each of these clouds represent a different method of data collection that we used, and we used these symbols throughout the report and the data collection tools. And so I'm going to go through some of the key issues that came up as well. So firstly, a lack of systems representatives. So initially, the working group was actually supposed to consist of community members and key system representatives, such as people from the local council, people from the job centre. However, this didn't occur. So the working group community members felt as though their lack of presence would limit the group's ability to implement large systems change. Then there was a lack of shared purpose. So not all members felt a sense of shared understanding of the purpose of the working group, why they were there, and why other people were there. Part of this was because of COVID. You can't really get to know people as well over Zoom. People also joined the group at different stages, and that created an uneven awareness of roles, expectations, and project information. decision-making power. Members felt a sense of power imbalance around decisions that were being made. Part of this was because there was a perceived power imbalance due to some members of the working group having greater involvement in the project than others. For example, me, as a member and an evaluator, I was attending meetings outside of the working group, and that meant I had information that other members might not have had access to. Other things that came up were a lack of engagement and attendance, really because people are busy. They didn't have time to read through all of the tasks or complete preparation work because they have other life commitments, and not everybody is always able to attend all of the meetings. Some people also felt like they needed to be upskilled and wanted training on the grant process before making such important decisions on how the money was going to be allocated. So luckily for us, the developmental evaluation supports the implementation of positive change to help the project succeed. And we're not just putting bad vibes out there. We want to make sure that people's voices are heard and that their concerns are resolved. And the developmental evaluation provides options rather than recommendations so that the working group are then able to collaboratively decide what changes to make and how. So we've seen positive changes in the project, showing that although there were criticisms, the project has really grown over time. So changes were made to balance out the power in the group. Working group members were invited to meetings where the agenda for the meetings was set. They were offered the opportunity to do group reflections, which allowed them to voice any concerns. They were also given the option to have greater responsibility within the project. And that feeds into the second point, greater autonomy for the working group members. So working group members were offered the opportunity to take more of a lead in the process. However, that meant that the working group members would have much more responsibility, which they might not have had capacity for alongside the other commitments. So in the end, the working group didn't go for that option. Some members decided that they didn't have the capacity to continue with the working group at all, or they'd lost passion for the project, so they dropped out completely. Other members decided that they wanted to do other work with Black Thrive outside of the working group, such as procurement work with Lambeth Council. Others, including myself, decided that we wanted to stay on in the working group and continue the process of giving out the grants. We also clarified roles. Part of the power imbalance was perceived due to a lack of clarity of everybody's roles. So everybody clarified their roles. And Black Thrive also made it clear that sometimes they might have to take the lead on things because at the end of the day, the project needs to get done. And there's only so much that can be done in the fortnightly working group meetings. And we had a session where we discussed all of our backgrounds, our interests in the project, and what systems change meant to all of us. And changes were also made to the general facilitation style. So people were prompted to speak more. We used the raised hand feature on Zoom a lot more, for example. And to address the need for upskilling, Black Thrive organised a grant-making information session, and that was led by the McPin Foundation. So it provided the opportunity for members to learn and find out more about the process of funding and ask questions that they had to people that deal with funds for a living. So my reflections, having a dual role in the project has had its benefits and its challenges. On the one hand, it's great because I'm seen as less of an outsider as I usually would as an evaluator and more as a peer. And this has helped me to build rapport with other project team members. I've built great relationships with members of the working group. At one point during lockdown, I started making and selling face masks, and members of the working group were some of the first people to purchase them and share my page. So it really does have that supportive community, family feeling. However, that sense of familiarity can make other people less comfortable when it comes to me putting on my evaluator hat and collecting data. What if they want to say something they didn't like about me or my work? They should have the opportunity to do so. So luckily we have peer researchers who are external to the working group. So it was always the option for working group members to talk to one of them instead of me, and to request that other members of the research team were not involved in analysing their data. Sometimes trying to communicate certain messages to the project team when I'm in my evaluator role can be frustrating. On occasion, despite clarifying, other members might perceive what I feed back to the group as my opinion and not as findings derived from the evaluation. But that's understandable. My dual roles can be confusing to people at times. When is Faith an evaluator? And when is Faith just Faith, the member of the project? And there was a lot of internal conflict that came up as well, especially at the beginning of the project. I struggled a lot with constantly being reminded of my own experiences, my own trauma, especially as the Black Lives Matter movement started not long after I joined the project. And with roles like this that involve using your lived experience, it's key to remember that we need support. Luckily, all the organizations in the project really made sure that our well-being was prioritized. The style of management and support at McPin is honestly untouchable. And we even received a sum of money from the funders, Guys and St. Thomas's charity, to use for well-being reasons. And I was actually able to use mine towards paying for therapy with a Black therapist, which I probably would not have been able to do if not for that fund. My dual role also made it hard for me to navigate conflict that sometimes occurred between the project and evaluation teams. This is because I feel that my allegiances are tied to both teams. However, these experiences have taught me a lot about how to manage conflicts. And in the end, everyone is brought back together by the one common goal of systems change for Black people in Lambeth with long-term health conditions. And I think for me, that's really the beauty in community work. It's quite raw, and at times it can feel quite emotionally intense, but it's only because everybody's so passionate about creating change. Everybody's so fueled by their own experiences and experiences of the people around them, in their families, in their communities. And if we're trying to make systems change that sticks and is truly for the people, then I don't think there's any better way to go about it than making sure we listen to the people that are most affected. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I've come to the end. This is my email and the contact details for the McPin Foundation. And yeah, I'm opening up the floor for questions now. Share the Q&A.
So we're going to launch a Menti, and you can submit any questions that you have for Faith via that. The details should be in the chat shortly. See what questions come through. Maybe I can ask you one, Faith, to begin with. What's the difference between a peer researcher and a community researcher?
Okay, so I actually didn't know the difference when I first started at McPin. So in the context of this project, a peer researcher is somebody that has direct lived experience of the project. So somebody that is Black, has experience of long-term health conditions, yeah, so those are the two main things for being a peer researcher, having a lived experience. And then a community researcher is someone that also resides in the community or has strong connections to the community. So because this project is based in Lambeth, the community researchers specifically have connections in Lambeth. And I don't think I know anybody in Lambeth actually, I'm not sure. But yeah, so that's the main difference between the two.
We've got a question coming now. So how do you keep people engaged alongside other priorities, and were there any other power dynamics that the group faced?
I think keeping people engaged was one of the key issues for a lot of people in the working group, because some people felt like they were putting in more effort than others. But I think that's kind of an issue that's always going to be faced with community work. When it's not your main job, it's not something that you've been like contracted to do, for instance. So you have to always understand that people are going to have other commitments. So what we did, we made sure that at the beginning of the project, we like talked to everybody about their availability. The meetings were never, they were not always at the same time. So one week we'd have a meeting in the middle of the day, and then the next meeting we'd have it in the evening to make sure we get like a good balance of people that were able to come. And another thing was just to schedule things in advance. We found that if we'd left people to do things on their own. For example, if we ask people to write reflections or send us reflections, it might not get done because it gets pushed back. When that's what happens when you have other priorities in your life. You tend to push the less important things back. So when we're able to schedule things, then people know that that's the time that they've put aside for the project, and yeah, we tend to get much better attendance.
That's really interesting, thank you. So how did you manage your mental health when being faced with this work? Was it triggering for you?
It was very, very triggering at the beginning. When I first started, I think I had a bit of imposter syndrome almost. I actually didn't feel like I had enough lived experience to be on the project, despite the fact that I'm Black, and I have had experiences with mental health. But at the same time, I was like surrounded by like these powerful Black people that have like had so much experience professionally and in their lives personally. And but I think at the end of the day, like I was put there for a reason. I feel like I've grown a lot from it. Mental health wise, yeah. I spoke a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement starting shortly after the project started, and it was quite difficult. But at the same time, it kind of gave me an outlet. I was able to talk to people who were going through the same thing at work. And I think if I was working in another job, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So there was a lot of difficult conversations that happened towards around the beginning of the project. But because those did happen, it made me more comfortable going forward, speaking openly to my team about my mental health, about my experiences, about racism in general, and being able to just speak up when I feel like something isn't right, whether within myself or within the project, within the work or whatever. Yeah.
And we're getting so many positive messages coming through for you, Faith. We'll save them all and share them because there's so many coming through. But one question here, what do you think is a key step if you want to create a group of lived experience researchers?
Oh, what do I think is a key step? I think I'll actually throw this to Tanya. My manager is she's in the meeting as well, because I guess she was part of creating this group.
Thanks, Faith. So I think the most important thing is when you're working in any kind of lived experience, whether that's lived experience researchers or lived experience advisory groups or peer support workers, any kind of lived experience, is making sure you've got the appropriate support structures built into the organisation to allow them to do the kind of work that they do. So when you do lived experience in any context, there is more of an emotional burden in the work. It takes more time to do reflection. You're having to work through lots of different things. I think making sure organisations have really good support structures, I think open and flexible management, and just a sense of openness amongst the team is really important.
That's really helpful. So there's a couple of questions here about people who want to train as lived experience researchers. Do you know any organisations that provide training for that, or is it?
I mean, McPin obviously do trainee positions quite often, so I'd say to keep an eye on the website for when they do come up. But I'm from Australia, as a note from the accent, so I'm not as familiar with what's available here, but definitely feel free to contact us through Faith's email or the McPin email address more broadly. I'm sure across McPin, we definitely would have links to various organisations that would be doing this kind of work.
Fantastic. Thank you. So there's another question. Oh, thank you. Someone's asking for contacts for the podcasts you mentioned, so maybe you can share those with us and we can share them with attendees later if they're available publicly.
Yeah, that's actually it was hosted by the Social Innovation Partnership, one of our partners in the project. So yeah, we can share that, and we can also share the report as well.
Great, because we'll be keeping in touch with people following the conference so we can share all materials. Another question here, what would be the best way to approach community services for consultation on ongoing research projects?
Oh. Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. What would be the best way to approach community services for consultation on ongoing research projects? So I guess how did you build those relationships with community services, and how did that happen?
I might actually have to throw that one back to Tanya again.
I think it really depends on what the focus of the project is. So in this project, Black Thrive have a fantastic network of organisations they reach out to and have contacts in different systems that they're working with that have made this project very successful. I think one of the biggest difficulties in systems change is often they're reliant on leveraging relationships between individuals to be able to get into different services or systems. But I think often just approaching people and saying, look, you've got this research project, it's really interesting, you want to make some change, would you be happy to partner? I think, you know, most places are open to collaboration and co-production, and, you know, it's just about reaching out to them and seeing who's interested.
Yeah, and just to add on to that as well, I think it's really important to make sure you know what you're also giving back to the community. I think in most cases, if you're doing it for a good reason and you're trying to benefit people, then people will be more open to working with you. And that's how research should be anyway. It should always be, in a way, you're giving, you're receiving, and you're also giving back. So yeah.
So maybe there's one over here that's saying, Faith, do you understand that changing inequalities in the system reflects your feelings of changing as a researcher in the field?
Changing inequalities in the system reflects. I'm not sure if I understand. Do you understand that changing inequalities in the system reflects your feelings of changing as a researcher at the field?
I suppose have you changed during the journey of undertaking the research?
Yes, I'd say generally speaking, in terms of like just being confident in myself, like there's so many, like we're talking about the employment structure here, like I'm in a job working in a Black project, and that's something that I think not a lot of Black people would get to experience and understand, like how important it is to be able to see yourself reflected in the work that you're doing. Honestly, it's like I think it's been really influential to how my career will progress after this. In terms of like systems change, even what I spoke about earlier about McPin deciding to bring in trainee peer researchers rather than bringing in a research manager, I think that's even something that will stick with me in terms of like trying to build up, upskill Black people rather than like just shifting them around the system. You know, there's a lot of like key things that I've picked up through this project that are going to stick with me throughout my career, and probably, you know, eventually when I become a manager myself one day, you know, these are going to be things that I'm going to be thinking about as well. So yeah, it's definitely influenced me a lot.
Oh, that's really interesting, Faith. I think we've answered most of the questions that have come through. So I don't know if there's any final thoughts you want to share with us, Faith, but thank you so much for your talk. It's been really fascinating insight.
Thank you. I don't really have anything else to share, just that I'm really grateful for everybody's comments. I've been waiting to present today for so long, so it feels like, oof, like it's another thing like ticked off of my box. It's been really good attending this conference, and I look forward to attending the rest of them later. Yeah, and I hope everyone's been able to take something away from this as well. So thank you.